Well, my specialty in religion is biblical archaeology. So
Right.
I was trained as a biblical archaeologist, and this is what I was doing also for my career is biblical archaeology. And if you are out in the sun, you're gonna have a hat.
Yeah, gotta protect yourself.
Yep.
I always thought that was a pretty cool picture.
All right, we should be good.
Okay, well, let's get going. So, um, as you all know, our guest is Professor Rami Arav. He works at the University of Nebraska Omaha. He's currently my professor in ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian religions. Um, I promised I would just go through his background a little bit because it's very extensive. So that you know kind of um, just the different specialities he has in academics. So he's got a BA and MA from Tel Aviv University, PhD from New York University in Near Eastern Languages and Literature. Um, Dissertation topic was Palestine during the Hellenistic period, settlement patterns and city planning. Like he was just mentioning, he's trained as a biblical archaeologist, directed a lot of different archaeological excavations. Since 1987, has directed the excavation of the biblical city of Bethsaida. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce that. And he's the director of the consortium of the Bethsaida excavations project headed at UNO. There's 30 scholars from 18 universities and colleges worldwide. He's the director of John and Carol Merrill expedition to the cave letters. He's published extensively in scientific and popular literature on the archaeology and history of the land of Israel and of the Bethsaida in particular. His latest books are Bethsaida, City by the Northern Shores of the Sea of Galilee, volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4, in a series of 5 books. So he rocked 4 out of the 5 of that series. And then also Jesus in His World, an archaeological and cultural dictionary, co-authored with John Rousseau, and Cities Through the Looking Glass. So he's teaching in the Department of Philosophy and Religion and the Department of History at UNO. Some of his special topic courses that he teaches are biblical archaeology, Jesus and archaeology, Egypt and Babylonian texts. And each summer he leads a group of students to his excavation site at Bethsaida, Israel, and students get college credit for that. So it's kind of a big deal. I don't know if they still have it, Professor, but there's like a mini museum at UNO for this project that you're directing. Do they still have that there?
Yeah, it's still there. It's supposed to go back to Israel, but because of the corona and everything, it's still staying
Yeah,
there. Yes.
yeah. It's a big deal, from what I understand. So I
Yeah, I
know
kind of have a
it's
question on that before we even get started. What is the Bethsaida? Bethsaida? What is it? What
Yeah,
exactly is the project, I guess?
oh, well, Bethsaida is a city by the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. Is the city which is most frequently mentioned in the New Testament after Jerusalem and in Capernaum. So it's the third most frequently mentioned in the New Testament, particularly in the Gospels. This is the place where 3 apostles were born, like Peter, the one who founded papacy, Andrew, the one who founded the Orthodox Church, and another one by the name of Philip. Some Catholic traditions say that there were also more disciples of Jesus born in Bethsaida. And the city was, in fact, unknown until I came to excavate it. It was, nobody knew where the city is. So I launched few probes to find out where it is, and that was a couple of decades ago. And then I found it, and I'm digging the site ever since.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. One other thing is you mentioned Dr. Rousseau. Was that name mentioned in there?
Correct. Yeah, Dr. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, but that's not the famous one who died 200 years ago.
Yeah.
It is a French guy from exactly the same district of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and perhaps from the same family that I collaborated with.
Yeah, I just mentioned that because I used to know it. He actually came to we had old SSA meetings, secular student meetings, secular student alliance, and he would come in there and give his, wisdom on everything. And when he retired, he left a whole bunch of books behind, the free books. And so I grabbed some of them. Some of them were like his books, and they're all torn to pieces, but they're really good. And he's got all of his notes and stuff in there, and I just love them. I also got his in my room. I don't know if you saw it, but I actually have there's like somebody made like a wood name thing for Dr. Rousseau, and I got that in my room. So
yeah, he was one of the greatest philosophers of the Enlightenment. That was a long time ago. That was about 250 years ago, something like that.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's my questions.
So yeah, that is Professor Arav, and thank you for sitting through that, Professor. I know it's not always fun hearing yourself talked about, but you've got an extensive background. I think it's worth bringing up in a semi-formal introduction, about as formal as we can muster in a group like this. So hope that did you honor. And now we just want to hear what you have to say on the topic that we had set out about the ancient Hebrew texts, what Christians call the Old Testament, and the idea that these stories were adopted from ancient Mesopotamian religions, and the view that basically they weren't, original. Obviously, the traditional view is that these are documents, documenting the divine interacting in the world, and from what I've understood is the current academic position is basically that that's not the case, that it kind of adopted these stories actually from the Mesopotamian religions. So if you want to present on that for about 30 minutes or certainly less, if you want to keep it a little shorter, and then we'll hold questions till the end, and we'll talk about it then.
Okay. Yep. All right. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm very glad to do that. I'm very pleased to to talk to students outside of the formal meeting of classes, and this is that's a great opportunity. All right. Before I start anything, I want to tell you that I'm going to present the academic scholarly view of the story. And academic scholarly view separates between the divine and human. All right, divine is divine, human are human, and scholars and scientists and stuff, usually what they deal with is with human, not with divine. So we are looking at the whole thing, the whole story, everything from the human point of view, from a human experience point of view, and not from the divine involvement and interference in human history. All right, so we simply separate between the two and try to understand it from a human experience point of view. Right now, this is one thing. The second thing I wanted to tell you is just to make a little survey on something that I found very interesting, and particularly this is something that employs or I wouldn't say bothers, but it is something that I find American scholars and American population by and large, and they are more interested in this issue more than anything else. And this is the historicity of the Bible, which means how much history is in the Bible. And before going into this in depth, I will just want to present to you the different approaches to historicity of the Bible from the three major different people who read the Bible. You got to remember that there are actually only two religions that read the Bible, and this is Jewish people and Christians. The Muslims know about the Bible because the Quran has stories from the Bible, but they don't read the Bible. They read the Quran and what the Quran says about the Bible. And sometimes it says, it abbreviates to a couple of sentences about what the Bible says in the long chapters. And this is, for instance, the story of creation, which is in the Bible in 2 chapters. And the Quran says it in 1 sentence. God created the world in 6 days. And the purpose of it is for you to acquit yourself. That's the entire creation story. Or sometimes, and this is, that derives from the fact that Muhammad never read the Bible. It was not translated into Arabic, so he couldn't read it. And he was told about the Bible and stories of the Bible from both Christians and Jews. So, for instance, and he mixed the whole thing up because it was not unwritten a book in front of him, although it was available, but he did not read it. It was not written in Arabic. So he got it from kind of an oral stories. So he mixed things up, like, Mary or Miriam, the sister of Moses, is in the Quran the same Mary who is the mother of Jesus. So he simply combined these two figures together as one because the name is the same. So he thought that this is the same person. And the two different people living in two different periods of time, two different places and stuff. But this is what he had. Well, so we have just two people who read the Bible. This is the Jewish people and the Christians. Now, what is their approach to the historicity of the Bible? The Jewish people look at the Bible not from a historical perspective. They don't associate to the Bible a lot of history. For the Jewish people, it's not history which is important in the Bible, but it is what you can take out of the Bible is the moral ethics that you can drive from the Bible. It's the role model that the Bible can play for the Jewish people. And I explain you why and how. For instance, Abraham is viewed in Judaism as a role model for all fathers. All fathers should be like Abraham. Do the same thing, raise their children, and so on. And Moses, for instance, is the role model of all rabbis because he was a lawgiver. No matter that, Moses was never ordained and there was no rabbis in his period of time, but he's a role model for all the rabbis. David is a role model for kings. All kings should be like David. They should take example of what David did, and so on. Solomon is a role model of wisdom. Everybody should be so smart and so wise as Solomon, and so on. You go from one figure to the other. They are all in one episode to the other. Everything is a role model to our behavior. How should we behave and react to situation? And the Bible is kind of a guideline as a role model for this is the way to behave, all right? So which means that historicity is not very important in Judaism. It is very similar to the story that I'm sure you all know, the story of George Washington and the cherry tree, right? You all know that, right? Correct? Yeah, all right. So, and the story, no matter that the story was fiction, Never happened, but everybody knows it because the moral of the story is that presidents never lie to the people. All right, this is what the story is supposed to teach us. President of the United States will never lie to the people. So, and then you say, hey, but the story of George Washington and the cherry tree was all fiction. So can a president lie? And he would say, no, despite that the story is fiction, the moral of the story is valid. The moral of the story is an important thing. So you hang on to the moral of the story and not that much to the historicity of it. You understand what I'm saying? So this is about the approach of the Jewish people. I can give you another example. A very good one is Little Red Riding Hood that you all were all brought to with this story, right? Correct? Is there anybody who doesn't know the story? Okay, so so what's the moral of the story there? The moral of the story is for a little girl, don't talk to strangers in the wood, because if you talk to strangers in the wood, they might be wolves, and you don't know that there are wolves in the wood. So don't talk to strangers. And then you go, and I never heard any girl or boy or whatever, a child, who would say to his parents, hey, but wolves do not talk. In the story, wolves talk, but wolves never talk. So does it mean that I can talk to strangers? Because the story is fiction. Does it mean that the moral of the story is also fiction? And a good parents will say, no, the story is fiction, but the moral of the story is valid, is true. Right? The story is only an example. It's a role model for you to behave. All right? So this is the way the Jewish people look at the Hebrew Bible. It's a moral story. And there is also there are also a couple of other things which I will get to it a little further on. But first of all, I want only to explain what are the approaches of the different denominations. Now, if we look at Christianity, we have three major three different denominations, and they are the Orthodox, Catholicism, and Protestantism. So we'll begin with the Orthodox. Orthodox Christians do not look at the Bible as historicity, as a book of history. No, for them, the Bible is a story about mysticism. It's something that is spiritual. It's mysticism. Jerusalem is in heaven. Everything is mystical. We don't know everything because it's a mystery. It's a divine wisdom that is behind this, that human will never understand, because this is divine knowledge. So it's kind of, remote from historicity or from our daily life. It's like something in heaven, something mystical, something spiritual. This is the Orthodox. If you go to the Catholics, Catholics by and large do not look at the Bible as a book of history as well. For them, it's not history. It is a book that what they call predestination. And particularly they take the book of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, as a predestination book, which means, not predestination, it's prefiguration, which means every story in the Old Testament is there to indicate that in the future, there's going to be Jesus coming. So it's like you read this, but that points out to Jesus in the future. Like the sacrifice of Isaac is the sacrifice of Jesus. No matter that, as Isaac was never sacrificed at the end. He was let go, of course, in the story, but they tell it as if it was a sacrifice. And that indicates that in the future, Jesus is going to be the sacrifice for the people. So you see, or Moses is a lawgiver, and he is another indicator that in the future Jesus will be a lawgiver and will interpret the Bible in his way. So we have another one way, and so on. We go from one figure to the other, from one episode to the other. Everything is supposed to indicate what is going to be in the future with Jesus. And then when Matthew comes to tell the story, he goes, well, this is as the prophets prophesies. He prophesies that so and so. This is to fulfill the prophecy. So you know what, I'm gonna put, all right, so Jesus is the you know what, I think I need to turn on the light. You don't see me very well. I see now, I realize. I hope you see me better now. Is that correct? All right, so so the Catholics look at the Bible as a book of prophecy about Jesus, and Matthew is, I mean, every episode with Jesus is a prophecy about Jesus, and Jesus is the fulfillment of a prophecies. As if the Bible, according to Matthew at least, is a book of prophecies, a book of oracles, like Greek oracles that is going to indicate stories and the life of Jesus. And I give you an example from Matthew. Before entering Jerusalem, Jesus says to his disciples, one of the disciples in Bethany, he says, go down and get me a donkey and a colt. And tell the owner that I'll get it back to you. So he brings the colt and the donkey. And Jesus, according to Matthew, sat on both animals, something that nobody can do. He sat on both animals together. Why? To fulfill the prophecy of Zechariah that says, in a kind of a lyric way, your Messiah is going to come riding on a horse, on a donkey. Your Messiah is going to sit on a donkey, on a colt. So the biblical literature, poetry is what we call parallels, like it's saying the same thing over and over again in different words. And Dustin, when you read so far, when you read Mesopotamian literature, you realize that you have the same thing over there too. This is like, I mean, saying one sentence, second sentence says exactly the same thing, but in different words. So this is the way Zechariah said, but for Matthew, it was sitting on one sentence. It's a prophecy that Jesus is going to sit on two animals, and he made Jesus sitting on a colt and a donkey. It's something that only Jesus perhaps can do, and go into the city. So this is the Catholics. So Catholics do not see it as a history, but a book of history, but a book of prophecies, prefiguration. Everything prefigures Jesus in the future. All right, this is the Catholics. What about the Protestants? And again, the Protestants, by and large, I'm not going to go into the different denominations, because the different denominations in Protestantism has different variants of things. So I'm not going into these variants. I'm going to, as an all, how did they look it up? So the Protestants, as you know, came very late in the history of religion, 16th century. It's not that long ago. Comparing, I don't know, with Judaism, like 3,000 years, so at least 25 centuries ago, and Christianity 20 centuries ago, 21 now. So this is only about 16th century. It's about like 500-600 years. It's not very old religion, or not very old part of Christianity. Now, when they were about to form their approach to the Bible, they had some problems because they came very late. They realized that some aspects were taken already by other religions, like, I mean, spirituality. You can go because that was Orthodox. Prefiguration, you can go there because this is Catholics. And if we will say the same thing as Catholics say, then what's the difference? We have the same thing. Why? So why to do all this Reformation if we and the Catholics are saying the same thing? So we have to say something different. So out of all the different things, they decided, the Protestants only decided that they're going to look at the Bible as a book of history, which means read it literally as it is. That is the way it happened. Literally, which means what? The world was created in 6 days, 24 hours every day, exactly in the same manner. Everything is exactly the same thing. I mean, everything was literally historical. That was a very new approach. Nobody before that suggested this. And they thought that they're going to use to develop some discipline that will make everybody realize that actually they got it right and everybody's wrong. And they were the people who founded the discipline which we call biblical archaeology, with a purpose that the biblical archaeology will show that reading the Bible literally is the right reading, and the Protestants got it right all the time, and the Catholics and the Orthodox are all wrong. So they started biblical archaeology already in the 19th century, and I'm just gonna cut it very short and get it quickly to the bottom line. The best example was for the Protestants, and all the archaeologists of the early archaeologists were, most of them, like 99% of them, were all Protestants. And one of the sites that they went to check out was the city of Jericho, to find the walls that collapsed, that came tumbling down by a divine interference. The people of Israel just surrounded the city and they blew these horns, and all of a sudden, with God interference, the city collapsed, city walls collapsed, and the Israelite went in, and that was the beginning of the conquest of Joshua. Joshua chapter 6, 5. So two archaeologists in the turn of the 20th century, one Austrian Catholic and the other one Protestants, German, went to excavate the city of Jericho, which was easy to find because the name was preserved, and they found city walls. And lo and behold, they said, we found the city wall of Joshua. This is the city wall that God himself collapsed. Everybody was excited. Well, the Protestants got it right. Everything is exactly as it is said in the Bible. Everything went fine, and I'm just skipping on. About like 50 years later, in the 1950s, a British archaeologist went to the site, to Jericho, to re-excavate it, or to excavate the rest of it. And what she found, she found at the end, she said, I'm very sorry, but the walls that were associated to Joshua and to God, that were supposed to be destroyed in the 13th century BC, actually were destroyed 1,000 years earlier. The two guys in the turn of the 20th century, they simply associated something 1,000 years later. They made a mistake of 1,000 years. And in that period of time, it was possible because people didn't know that much. So she said, it's not the walls of Joshua. It's not. And moreover, she said, you know what? At the time of Joshua, which means 13th century BC, there was no city in Jericho. There was no city, nothing. Couldn't find anything. No city. That put a big question mark on, hey, what's going on? And today we realized that, in fact, and just again, to cut this story short today, we realized that this is not the way to read the Bible, and archaeology cannot contribute to the historicity reading of the Bible. And moreover, today, archaeologists think that our task is not to prove or disprove the Bible. We are there for a much better mission, and this is to understand the period of time and to understand the environment, to understand what was going on. So from here, I go now back again to the Bible itself and to the question of what's the relationship between the Bible and the Mesopotamian mythologies. Okay. Now, the Bible tells the story of the people of Israel, but it begins with Adam and Eve, and then it slowly focuses to one family, Abraham, and then focuses from Abraham to the people of Israel. So we have a very broad story at the beginning of humanity at all, and then we slowly focus to one family, one people, and this is and the story, in fact, ends with the collapse of the Hebrew Bible. I'm talking with the collapse of the kingdom of Judah and the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. Right. This is how the story is built from the beginning to the end. And again, I'm going to cut the story short. When was the story told? Most probably, the story was, most scholars believe that, and again, I'm presenting to you the scholarly view. Scholars today think that most of the Hebrew Bible was written in what they call the Babylonian exile or in the post-Babylonian exile. Now, let me tell you this. The Israelites are very first time mentioned in the Bible in the end of the 13th century BC as already in the land of Israel. And the temple was destroyed by the Babylonian and in the year 586 BC, which means 6th century BC. So we have about 6 centuries, which is the story of the Israelite people, right, from 6th century. And if we add to it all the period before that, we are getting all the way to Adam and Eve, but this is a story of humanity, and then we go into the and then we have, of course, the story of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then we go to the story of Egypt and Exodus of Egypt and stuff. But this is in the Bible. What we have in reality, in archaeology, is 12th century, end of the 13th century BC to the 6th century BC. This is what we have at hand for archaeologists to work. Where was the story told? Most probably, scholars think, it was told in the exile of Babylon, which means in the 6th century, 5th century BC, in Babylon, that was written down. When it was written down, it was not written down all the way from the scratch. The Jews in Babylon brought with them all kind of documents, and in Babylon, they rewrote the Bible in the form that we have it today. So what was the main issue? What was the problem of the people in the Jews in Babylon in the 6th, 5th century BC? The major problem that they had was what went wrong. They said, well, God promised us a land. It was delivered to Abraham. And then the promised land, he promised us to turn out into people, also with Abraham and Moses and stuff. And he promised to conquer the land for us, and he did it. Conquered the land from the Canaanites, and we were in the land. We built for him a temple in Jerusalem, great temple, and Solomon was the builder. And then the temple was destroyed. Why? Where was God? Why God did not intervene in this? Where was he? God, what happened? What went wrong? We did exactly what God wanted us to do, but still the temple was destroyed. We are in exile. We are not in our homeland. What happened? So that was the question. What went wrong? In order to answer what went wrong, they wrote a Bible. What went wrong? And they wrote a Bible from the very beginning to the end with one thing in mind all the time. One principle in mind all the time. Reward and punishment. If you're good, you'll be rewarded. If you're bad, you're going to be punished. That's it. So they told the whole story from the beginning to the end with this thing in mind all the time. Reward and punishment, which will lead that at the very beginning, we did everything was right, was fine, but slowly we sinned, they said. It's not that there were some other things. No, no, no. We sinned, and this is the reason we were punished, and the temple was destroyed, and the country was destroyed. Because of our sin, we were exiled because of our sin. So that's the way they explained it to themselves, and they wrote the Bible to show that how things are going down the hill from David all the way down, from Moses all the way down, or David and Solomon all the way down the hill until the destruction of the temple. And then we understand now why we are in exile. We sinned, and this is the story. You want to know where we sinned? Read the Bible, and you'll find out how we sinned slowly, and we got to this situation. So, in order to write the story before the 13th century, before, let's say, David and Solomon and stuff, and go back all the way to Adam and Eve and Moses and stuff, and to show that, in fact, this reward and punishment is something which is so unique that it goes all over the world. What they did was building up a larger story in order to show that this principle of reward and punishment exists everywhere, even before the Israelites were formed as people. But they didn't have any proof or any story to show that before that it was already valid. So what did they do? They borrowed themes from the Babylonian mythology. Now, borrowing things from another religion is not unusual. Every religion does the same thing. There is actually no religion in the world which is totally isolated from influences and borrowing from other religions. There are very few, only religions that have no contact with other people whatsoever, no contact whatsoever with other people would not be influenced by other people. But religions that are in contact with other people will, of course, will influence each other, and they will create something which we call syncretism, which is a combination of two religions together in order sometimes to create another religion, or simply to explain things in one religion and the other. So the place that they could borrow themes for the story was the Babylonian mythology. And the Babylonians were great storytellers, and they had great mythologies. And one of them we read in the class just now, but they have Gilgamesh, which we're going to read next. And this is also a story that you read it, you realize that, hey, this is like in the Bible. And so this is how it was borrowed. Themes were borrowed from other places. So there were few themes that were borrowed from Egypt. Egypt was not as influential on the Israelites as were the Babylonians. Why? Because the Israelites were in Babylon, and they were influenced by the Babylonians. But the Egyptians are different. The Egyptians, we should all remember and know that the Egyptians are, in fact, an African civilization, all right? Egypt is in Africa, you know that? Did you realize it? Yeah, Egypt is in Africa. Egypt is an African civilization. The Africans are different from the rest of the Middle Eastern or the Near Eastern. The rest of the Near Easterns then, or today, were Semitic people, which means people speaking Semitic languages. Today is Arabic, Hebrew, Aramaic, and so on. Egyptians is not, they don't speak any Semitic language. They speak Egyptian, which is an African language. We call it Nilotic language because this is a language that was developed alongside the Nile River. So it's Nilotic, or sometimes we call it Hamite or semi-Hamite, because the Bible says that the Egyptians are originally people of Ham, so they're Hamites. But scholars usually call it Nilotic civilization that developed alongside the Nile River. And they're very different. And for the biblical people, or for the Semitic people living in the rest of the Near East, this civilization was very exotic. It was exotic also to the Romans. It is strange and exotic. It's not, they have very high literature and very high art, but it's so different from the Semitic people. It's so different that they look at it as if something exotic. It's like you are fascinated, for instance, by when you see a pagoda, um, Chinese pagoda. Oh, what beautiful! But this is something which is incomprehensible. What is this structure? What is this pagoda of this roof and one on top of the other? It's very exotic. It's like when people a long time ago, I don't know if they still do it today, when they went to visit Paris, for instance, they would bring back home a little Eiffel tour like this, just to say, I was in Paris, you see this Eiffel tour? Sorry. And so, these exotic things that people bring with them, sometimes without even understanding what they are doing, but this is what they did. And the same thing with Egyptian. Very little is taken from the Egyptians, but the majority of things were taken from the Babylonians. So there are a lot of examples. Now, if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer if I know the answer. I don't know. I don't promise you to know all the answers, but those, answers that I know, I will tell you. Answers which I don't know, I'll not be shy, and I'll tell you. I'm gonna be shy. I'm not gonna pretend I know. All right. So I'm gonna.
All right.
Hey,
Hey.
Right. Thank you.
you're right on the money too. 31 minutes.
Okay, good. Yeah. All right.
Well, thank you for that presentation, Professor. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you
Helps me for sure understand, because I know that's not the main subject of the class I'm taking, but it's,
yeah.
as you can probably tell in my papers, it's the topic that keeps like sticking in my brain. so it's nice to have it explained to me, a little more in depth. So I appreciate that. Will anyone have questions? Drew, look like
No
you're thinking.
questions.
I sure have some, but
yeah,
I don't
go
wanna...
ahead, Dustin.
I guess you're up first, Dustin.
Well, I'll just ask one while people are thinking, because I don't want to ask all of mine necessarily. I don't even know if we have time. But I guess just to stick to, there's definitely a few things that were interesting that I'd like to hopefully get into. But just, to stick to the straight subject of, these ancient, the Hebrew Bible, these stories, were saying that they came from Babylonian mythology. They were, I described it as plagiarized, because I'm a bit, have the flair for dramatic, but however you want to say that, they were sort of inspired by,
we call it borrowing.
They borrowed, which to me would indicate that it's just, it shouldn't be taken as history. It's more just kind of a poetic expression, which I guess is what, kind of you're saying, is that it's not, these things aren't historical. These things were just kind of an expression of their wrestling with what went wrong with their people.
I hate to jump in there, but I mean, you can borrow like historical facts from other cultures, right? Like, so it's not really, that doesn't necessarily mean it's like non-historical just because they borrowed it. Just clarifying.
That's correct. Yeah, that's right. Depends what you borrow. If you borrow a myth, it will never turn into historical.
Right. No. But I take it, I guess when I read, I think when I read the Hebrew Bible, it seems like they're saying we have this unique understanding of the divine, and this wasn't this is a unique God, and our understanding of him is fully independent of the way any other peoples understand their gods. I mean, that's kind of the big theme. So if they're saying that, but then kind of behind the scenes they've borrowed, from these other religions, I would probably just say, okay, I would just call it, more an artistic expression of what went wrong with their people, rather than an objective presentation of, the reality of the divine, I would more just take it kind of from that cultural lens of it's just an expression.
Yeah. Okay.
So
You forward to me a couple of other questions, like, I mean, how can we compare it to Babylonian mythology when we know that the Jewish were monotheistic, the Babylonians were polytheistic,
Right.
the divine is unseen and formless, and here we have a divine which has a form and can be seen. How can you do that? I mean, how did they borrow when it doesn't match one to one?
Right.
Yeah, and the answer is this. I mean, this is correct. When the Israelites or when the Jews came to Babylon, when they were expelled to Babylon, they were already monotheistic, but they were not monotheistic from Abraham, as the Bible wants us to believe. As a matter of fact, we don't know anything about Abraham. We don't know about if he was ever a historical figure or not. And all what we can tell is from the 13th century Abraham, if he was a historical figure, and we go by the historical reckoning of chronology, he would have been a person in about like the 22nd, 21st century BC. But and I'll go back to it right away. But and the Israelites associated their monotheism to Abraham. As a matter of fact, Christianity does the same thing, and Islam does the same thing. So this is the reason why we call these three religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, we call it Abrahamic religions, because the three of them associate the founder to Abraham himself, despite the fact that we know very little about historical Abraham, actually know nothing about historical Abraham. And most probably Israelites were not monotheistic. Well, they were not formed there, but they were not monotheistic before you'll be surprised, 7th century BC. All right, the 7th century BC. Remember, David is about like 10th century BC, okay? And this is a couple of centuries later, they would become monotheistic, particularly by a reformation that was made by King Josiah in about middle of the 7th century. He made this monotheistic reformation. And before that, we don't see too much monotheism in this religion. But in Babylon, they were already monotheistic, you are right. Now, but at the same time, many people in the Middle East were already monotheistic, so it was not, a copyright of the Israelites or the Jews. It was almost every neighbor of the Israelites were already monotheistic. They all had their own divine, who was their divine, but it's not monotheism. It was simply developed together with everybody else in the region. It was kind of a regional trend, including the Babylonians, who at that time worshipped either, depends what period exactly, Marduk, chief god, or the moon god. It's also, we have sometimes this, sometimes the other, so we have that. Monotheism is not the issue. How about the unseen and formless God that is opposed to the seen and form God of the Babylonians, like Marduk or the moon god? This is interesting. The very first people who came up with the idea of unseen and formless God were the ancient Egyptians. All right? The ancient Egyptians were the very first one to develop the concept of God who is unseen and formless. They call it Amun. And I told you that Amun is that the Egyptians spoke a Nilotic language, which is some kind of an African language. It's very different from any other African language that we know of, but it's African language. And Amun in ancient Egyptian, and fortunately enough, we know how to read ancient Egyptian. And Amun means in ancient Egyptian, the hidden one, the unseen one. And if you are hidden and unseen, what is your form? You're formless. Then Amun says about himself, when he's asked, who are you? He says, I am who I am, or I will be whom I will be. This is ancient Egyptian Amun definition of himself. You understand what I'm saying? It's not Jewish, it's ancient Egyptian. Here, the ancient Israelite borrowed this term from the Egyptian, perhaps through this figure called Moses. Why Moses? Because the word Moses is in ancient Egyptian. The Bible explains that Moses means to be drawn out of the water, but it's not true. In Hebrew, it doesn't mean to draw out of the water. The word Moses doesn't mean drawing out of water. No, it's not. It's simply an explanation, popular explanation that is not the real answer, what Moses means. Moses is an Egyptian name, which means the son of. We have many names like that in Egyptian, the son of, like we have Tutmoses. Tut is the god of wisdom in ancient Egypt. And Tutmoses is the son of God of wisdom. Ra-Moses is the son of the god Ra, the chief god. And Yah-Moses is also the son of, I can't remember now what is Yah, but it's another thing. So we have this Moses is an Egyptian name, which is the son of, but with the case of the biblical Moses, we don't know the son of whom, we don't know what he's the son of, which means he's Egyptian.
He's got to be the son of someone.
He got to be son of someone, of course. but well, the Bible says who he's the son of, but his name is son of, and it's supposed to be some kind of a deity. So he is an Egyptian guy who brought perhaps from Egypt the idea of the unseen and formless God. And indeed, this is what he sees, according to the Bible, with the burning bush. And he sees the burning bush and he asks, who are you? And he says, I am whoever I am, or I will be whoever I will be. Just exactly, this is, if you want, this is plagiarism from Amun. This is exactly how Amun describes himself. And now Moses took it to Yahweh, right? And Yahweh, again, is not the original Jewish deity, but it is already encountered, the ancient Egyptian encountered a tribe in about northern Arabia of Bedouins, of these nomads of northern Arabia, who worship a god called Yahweh. And the ancient Egyptian called this is the land of Yahweh, of the worshippers of Yahweh. And the date is 14th century BC, much, much before the Israelites, 200 years before the Israelites were already in the land of Israel. So Yahweh was a god in the area or in this area. And perhaps the Israelites, again, borrowed the name of the god, borrowed the concept of formless and unseen, and adopted it to their deity. So you see what they did. They were a land in what we call a bridge land between Egypt and Mesopotamia. Both of them influenced Judaism and created what it created.
Oh, that was a pretty good answer. At least for me. But just to go a little bit more I don't know if you have like the details on this, it's kind of reaching, but I know we use the term borrowed a lot, like they borrowed from different religions around them and everything, but like how exactly would that start a religion, I guess, is my question. Is because like just because these concepts are around doesn't mean like, you know, all of a sudden I'm just going to start my own religion and I'm going to take these things from here and there and bam, my religion started today. Like, so how would it manifest, I guess? I don't know too much about how religions get started, but like, I mean, what's maybe the academic way that they theorize that this happened?
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, that's a book. What you're asking is deserves a book.
or a class or a whole class on it or something.
On a whole class on it. Yeah, by the way, I'm teaching a class on it, which is so-called Ancient Israel, but you're going to graduate in May, so you're not going to be able to take my class, and this is only I'm going to teach in the next fall. So, well, in this class, I'm trying to answer what are the origins of Israel. So
We'll just sum it all up in like, you know, in 5 minutes, right?
One sentence, no.
Well, I'll tell you what the bottom line is of the whole thing. I'm going to put all the arguments. Okay, the bottom line is that the Israelites, ancient Israelites, were actually they came out from the Canaanites. They are the same people as the Canaanites in slightly later period. And they are Canaanites, which means what? It means that they were never in Egypt. There was never Exodus, right? Never in Egypt, never Exodus. And they actually never left the country. They were always in the same country. And just a couple of the highlights of the evidence for that. The ancient Canaanites were the older population of this country, of the land of Israel, of Canaan, all right? Canaan was the land of the Canaanites. And scholars are saying that the Israelites are, in fact, later development of these Canaanites. How come? First of all, a couple of things are good evidence for that. The language of the Canaanites is very similar to Hebrew. It's like Hebrew. It's very archaic Hebrew, but it is Hebrew. We know quite a lot about the Canaanite language because the Canaanites left a beautiful literature that was excavated in northern Syria already in the 1930s, and we have it, I think, almost now translated and into English and other languages, and you can read it. And the similarities to Israelites there is great. And moreover, those of you or those people who read Hebrew can read these documents written in Canaanite almost like they read a newspaper in Hebrew. I mean, you know, people who are fluent in Hebrew, like me, for instance, I can read Canaanite text very similar to the way I read a Hebrew newspaper. It's the same language. It's not exactly, because the Canaanite is an archaic version of Hebrew of today. It's an archaic version, which means there are all kind of archaisms there, but it's the same language, the same grammar, the same thing, and the vocabulary is almost the same. Today, of course, it's much more developed, but it is the same thing. And it's interesting. So this is one thing. The language is the same thing, almost very weird. The second thing is that to the Israelites, the word Israel is a combination of two words, Isra and El. The Bible tells you where this word Israel comes from, and it tells you that Jacob struggled with the angel, and the angel says to him, well, you struggled with the angel of God, and you overcame. So your name from now on is not Jacob, but Israel. So it means that Israel means to struggle with God. But in fact, it's not true. It's not true in Hebrew. The word Israel is not to struggle in Hebrew. The word Israel in Hebrew means to dwell under, to be, particularly to dwell under or to comply. It's like the word Sarah is coming from the same root, the same word Sarah, to live with, to be under, to comply to. and the word El is very famous god in the Canaanite tradition, in the Canaanite pantheon. This is the top god. This is the chief god of the Canaanite pantheon. El, he was the father of all the gods and goddesses, was El. So this is a declaration, confession, declaration of the Israelite, saying, we are under the auspices, or we dwell under God El, the chief god of the Canaanites. Why did they do it? That's a story for maybe if you take my class, I will do that, because that's a little longer story. But it is that this is the meaning of the word Israel, means to dwell under God El, who is accidentally also the chief god of the Canaanites. And there are a few other things that are similar. Like, I mean, the material culture of the Canaanites and the material culture of early Israelites is the same thing. Archaeologists can almost not see the difference between the two. Or in fact, you can see the development from one to the other, but you don't see totally new people coming in, which means that this story about Exodus and wandering in the Sinai desert and conquering the country by Joshua, they're not historical. Kathleen Kenyon, already in the 1950s, she discovered that Joshua that Jericho did not exist at the time when we date Joshua. So, and many other places too. Any more questions or things that you want to know? If you want to know something, just tell me. I'm sure that you want to know a lot of things, but I cannot speak on your name. You have to tell me what you're interested in.
Okay, Drew, you got anything?
I'm more taking stuff in than wanting to put anything out. There's a lot coming in. First off, thank you so much for sharing all this. This is profoundly interesting to me, and I've not heard really any of it before, so this is all new and interesting information. I think I just want to go read a bunch of books, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's so much being, thrown out that we can't, we couldn't go back and forth on every single, point being made.
Yeah.
But, I was wondering, Professor, if, back to the point of the Babylonian stories influencing the Hebrew Bible, do you get the sense that, because you've thrown out a lot of, this story didn't happen the way it's presented because of this, and this story didn't happen because of this. Do you think that backdrop, I guess I'm wondering what influenced, which view influenced which? Do you think that because there's this sort of scaffolding, this, in the academic view right now, they've got this whole scaffolding of all these different pieces that basically point to the Hebrew Bible being not the way it's presenting itself? Do you think that on that scaffold, then they say, kind of like you said, I can pretty much read into that as those stories are influenced by Babylon, because we already sort of know that it's not, things didn't happen the way it was presented. So therefore, maybe the best reading of it is they were influenced by these Babylonian religions. Or is there direct evidence, specific direct evidence of that influence happening?
Yeah, first of all, the Babylonian traditions or the Babylonian mythology is much older than the Bible. And the Babylonians themselves were not original in their stories and their mythology. They were not. They actually borrowed from their neighbors. Usually, people do that all the time. They borrowed from their neighbors, the Sumerians. Sumerians were people who lived in the southern part of Mesopotamia, in the area of what is today southern Iraq, the area of Bosra, the area where the Shiites fight with the Sunnis in this area. I won't advise you to go there today, but this is the area of where the Sumerians lived. They had famous cities like the city of Ur that became very famous. Like, I mean, this is where Abraham was supposed to be born, and there were many other cities over there. And they had a king, a king by the name of Gudea, which had plenty of statues. Today we know about like 27 statues of this particular king, and so on. So they had their mythology, and that the Babylonians borrowed from their mythology, and they converted it to their mythology or to their understanding of this mythology. So they changed the names, they made it a little bit different, and so on. And the Israelites are like, I mean, now this third party to borrow the Babylonians who borrowed from the Sumerians. So you see that this is a chain of one borrowing from the other. Not only mythological stories like this, but also, for instance, the stories that are behind people. Like the birth of Moses is always described as a miraculous story, as like he was as if born in Egypt. I mean, he was Egyptian, so born in Egypt, but his mother put him on a basket, and the daughter of Pharaoh found him, and she took him home, and he was raised in Egyptian palace and stuff. The idea that a baby is floating on a basket on a river was taken from the Babylonian tradition. This is exactly what the great king of Sargon told about himself in about the 23rd century BC, all right? 23rd century BC. That's what he told about himself. I was in the basket, and I was pulled out from the basket by a gardener. So there is a lot of borrowing from all these things. Now, how do we know if this is not historical or not? One of the things that is that when you really compare it to what we know from archaeology, and I'll give you here a very quick example. Are you ready to get this, to hear that, or we can go to whatever? Huh? Okay, all right. So the Bible tells the story of how Abraham chose for his son a bride, and the bride's name is Rebecca. How Rebecca became the wife of Isaac. And the story goes like this. First of all, the wife of Isaac should be a very important person, because she would be the matriarch of the people of Israel, right? So we have Sarah, and then Rebecca, and then Leah and Rachel. They're all the matriarchs. So they all have to be very, very special people, all these matriarchs. So what is the unique thing about Rebecca? Abraham took his servant, his name was Eliezer, and he told him, listen, he says, I don't want my son to marry one of these local girls here. I want you to go to my hometown, which is the city of Haran, which is today in northern Mesopotamia, in southern Turkey of today. I want you to go there to Haran, and I want you to go to my family there and pick up a woman there that would fit for my son, and bring her here. He says, okay, fine. So he loaded 10 camels with a lot of gifts and stuff, and went on his way to Haran from where he was he made about 1,000 miles. So on his way, he was thinking, how am I going to find a bride to Isaac? I mean, there are so many pretty girls there. How would I select one for the son of my master? I don't know. And God says to him, don't worry, I'll help you to do that. And he goes, how would you help me? He says, all what you need to do is go to the city of Haran, sit next to the well, and wait until the girls come to draw water from the well. The woman that will come to draw water from the well and say, I will draw water from the well to you and your camels. She is the girl. And he says, okay, fine. He goes and he goes and does exactly the same thing. And, exactly the same thing happened. And the rest is history, kind of. All right. The question is, what history is in this story? Okay. There are a couple of problems with making the story historical. First of all, we remember that I told you that according to the biblical chronology, Abraham was supposed to be a figure of the 21st, 22nd century BC. And we know quite a good deal about this period of time in Mesopotamia and in the entire Middle East. We know, for instance, that the city of Haran was not built yet. It would be built only centuries later, centuries and centuries later. So he couldn't go to Haran, all right, because there was no city by the name of Haran. Okay. Then he was supposed to go to the well of the city and to wait there. That's another problem. Wells were not dug before the 10th century BC. People did not know that there is groundwater, that there is aquifer. They didn't know about that. They discovered only in 10th century, about 1,000 years after Abraham. So take the story from the story, take Haran out, take the well out. All right. He went with 10 camels, up, 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 up. No camels. Why? Because camels were very first time domesticated in the 10th century BC. Before that, camels were not domesticated. They were wild animals roaming in the desert, but not domesticated. The first domesticated models showed up in the 10th century. I'm joking. The first camels were domesticated in the 10th century BC, which means Abraham in the 21st century BC didn't know what a camel is. I mean, perhaps he knew, but he never thought that these animals can be domesticated. So what do? You take the camels out from the story. All right. So you take the city of Haran out, you take the whales out, you take the camels out. And and the family says, that's Laban. Laban is Aramean. Go to the Arameans family. This is my family, the Arameans of Laban. It goes, okay, fine. Here we have another problem. What's the problem? The problem is that the Arameans did not show up in history before the 14th century BC. So we are in big trouble, right? We take all the elements from the story. There's no one single element in the story that can survive the scrutiny of history, right? Nothing. The story was supposed to be, as if the story happened, it was supposed to be no earlier than the 10th century BC. So if the story was at the 10th century BC, then we are in a problem with King David, who's exactly the same period of time. No. We cannot put Abraham and David at the same period of time because we have Moses and we have Joshua and we have the judges, and what do we do with all these things? So you see where we are at. That's the problem. So the biblical stories cannot be read literally. It's everything but not literal. It's leading to reward and punishment. This is actually a story of reward. If you do what I'm telling you to do, you'll get rewarded and you'll get Rebecca. If you do what I'm telling you to do. So that's a reward and punishment, although never happened.
So we only have a few minutes left.
Okay.
But I want to see if I can see if I'm understanding correctly, because again, you're talking about, reasons why the Bible shouldn't be taken historically or literally. So, but do you think that's a good characterization of this theory of Babylonian influence on the stories? Do you think it's predicated basically on all this other stuff that's saying the Bible isn't historical, it shouldn't be read as true, because it doesn't sound like anyway so far that we've had really good evidence for, here, look at where they took the stories. We don't have evidence necessarily of that transmission or of that influence, but it's kind of like assuming that the Bible is not historical and it's not literal, then it's just basically reasonable to assume that they had to have taken influence from somewhere, right? If it's not this accurate representation, they had to have kind of gotten some of these themes from somewhere, probably the people nearest to them. Is that kind of a good characterization?
Yeah, about so. It is, the Bible is the creation of the Babylonian Jews who were in Babylon, and they were in contact with the Babylonians. They were not there in isolated or in any isolation. They were there fully integrated in the Babylonian society. They could speak the language because Hebrew is very similar to either Akkadian, the language of the Babylonian, or Aramaic, which was the lingua franca, which was like very commonly taught. So it's another Semitic language that Hebrew speaker could easily pick up. It's like the difference between, let's say, German and English. If you are English speaker and you are in Germany for a couple of years, you can easily pick up German because the languages are very similar. It's not like, if you are, I don't know, an English speaker and you go to Saudi Arabia and they speak Arabic, which is totally different language. So that's, it will take longer time. So they were totally integrated in the Babylonian society. In fact, they were there all the time. And the last Jews to leave Babylon were in 1948 when the State of Israel was formed, and the Muslims in Iraq persecuted the Jews, so they simply fled, and some of them were actually kicked out of Iraq, and they came to Israel. That was kind of almost the last. I don't know if there are any Jews left in Babylon or in Iraq or in Baghdad, but the last wave of leaving the Babylonian exile was only like 70 years ago. They were there for about like 25 centuries. So integrated, and they read and they knew, and see, of course, when they wrote their own Bible, that was a lot of borrowing.
Got it.
Okay,
well, that
Drew?
pretty much takes us to 7.
Yeah, I'll give Drew one more chance to ask something.
Sure.
I have about a page or two of notes. I don't think I have any questions.
All right, yeah, I got 3 pages with multiple questions, but yeah, we'll maybe come back.
So the professor needs to come back about 5 more times.
I would love meetings.
That. I got one quick question. Have you ever seen the board game? It's like this.
No, what is this?
No,
it's a board game, but yeah, I think that, I know, yes, I know. It's like, you throw a dice and you move. I've seen it, yes,
yeah. I just remember you mentioned the city and I made like a board game and it's called or something like that.
Yes, yeah.
And so it's cool. You can I just 3D printed that out, and then you can play like this ancient board game, But I just thought I'd ask if you saw that before.
Yeah.
Before we go, do you have any books or papers, or give a shout out to your class so that we can get more students in there?
I'd love to know about that.
Any book that I would recommend you to read, or what?
Or maybe you published a book. I don't know.
This is your time for shameless self-advertising.
Yeah, any self-advertisement.
But if you want to do anything if you want to read anything about the Babylonians, I think that Dustin, I think that you made pretty good library of bibliography of Babylonian literature, right? Is that correct?
For my Gobekli paper?
Yeah, for the paper you wrote,
I can share that with them. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, you can share this. Yeah, you have.
All right. Yeah, maybe we'll come back to you with some questions that we think about after a while. What I guess we'll just give a shout out for your class again. What is your class?
The class that I'm teaching that Dustin is now taking, it is
No, this upcoming semester.
oh,
Yeah, the
next
upcoming.
semester is in ancient Israel. If I'm not wrong, I'm teaching ancient Israel. If I'm not wrong, I can't remember what I signed up for, but I think that this is ancient Israel.
Do you know what number it is?
2000.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think that wraps us up then. Thanks again for coming here and speaking on all this. And it's great information. I've learned a lot.
Thank
Some of
you.
the stuff we've been talking about quite a bit. So
Thank you
Yeah,
for
I'm
inviting
sure
me.
we'll continue this discussion for quite a while. So you're always welcome back, Professor.
Yeah, thank you. If you
Yeah, I'd
invite
love to
me,
have you back.
if you invite me back, I will come. Definitely, I will come. I love to talk to young
Awesome.
people.
yeah.
Very
All
good.
right.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yep, thank you so much for doing
inviting
this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you very much. Nice to see you.
All right.
See you later. Have a good
All right,
night.
have a
Good
nice
night.
night.
Good night, guys.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.